Hello and welcome to our next topic, which is topic 3, excuse me, which looks at the issue of instrumentalities. And these are the instruments that are used in the promotion of human rights. The definition of instrumentality comes from the idea of an instrument that you use for a given purpose. What the lawyers refer to as something through which an end is achieved, something that serves as an intermediary or agent through which one or more functions of a large entity are carried out. And this is usually in terms of things like documents, constitutions, conventions. All these are used as instruments to promote human rights. Moving on, we find that the United Nations Charter is one such very important instrumentality. What makes it powerful is the fact that the UN has got the membership of virtually everyone in the world. So because of that, they have got a virtue mandate to protect human rights. And that comes from the Charter. The UN Charter very clearly identifies the importance of human rights. So the General Assembly states that it shall initiate studies and make recommendations for the purpose of promoting international cooperation in the economic, social, cultural, educational, and health fields, and assisting in the realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or even religion. To take the matter closer to home, regional organizations have got their own charters that try to give the United Nations Charter some local flavor. So with the African Charter on Human Rights, it's called African Charter on Human and People's Rights, or Banjul Charter, which is where it was signed. It's much broader than the UN Charter or Universal Declaration of Human Rights because it recognizes both individual and collective rights. It will, for instance, accept someone as a refugee if they are coming from an area that is either occupied or there is generalized violence, whereas the very narrow Universal Declaration of Human Rights approach will only look at how the individual is affected. It doesn't really take much into consideration the generalized problems that is facing an entire community, which is usually and normally the case. Then you also have the European Convention on Human Rights that follows very closely on the Universal Declaration and also has a narrow focus with a major emphasis being on civil and political rights, as you would expect. The American Convention on Human Rights is also there and also focuses on human rights as they are in the Universal Declaration. There's also the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, pretty much also similar to Universal Declaration, but puts a bit more emphasis on our economic, social, and cultural rights, which is what you would expect an Eastern approach to be. Now, at this point, I would suggest you pause and look at what instrumentalities would apply to some specific fields and got some examples here with child protection, working with the people with mental health, working with the indigenous people, working with refugees and asylum seekers, or working with the people from minority or migrant backgrounds. So have a look at the various UN instrumentalities and see which one you would use in relation to these topics. Now, as we have seen within the different discussions we have had about the human rights, clearly there are some limitations with the UN, given that even though these documents look fantastic, we know that in practice people are not having human rights. And why is that? We don't see any action from the UN despite these lofty declarations. One of the problems is that UN depends on the members. Any action depends on the members, and different members have different interests, and because of those different interests and pulling in different directions, then UN often is unable to have a united action or a united force. You also find that human rights are not always accorded the highest priority. Other issues like the economy, domestic politics, foreign policy, geopolitics, national interest, all these things sometimes come before human rights, and therefore the UN member countries are not able to act in unison to resolve problems. There are also power imbalances. The 5 countries that have got the veto vote, USA, Russia, China, UK and France, they can decide which way things will go, even if it's not what the majority of the members want. And sometimes they do it in support of each other. Say the countries aligned with the US will work together, and the countries that are allied to Russia and China sometimes work in the opposite direction, and that can make the work of the UN sometimes very, very difficult. You can think of some examples where the failure has been quite obvious. In Palestine, with the issues with the Palestinian people, especially in the Gaza Strip, we have seen people's rights being violated in quite a gross way without any intervention. We see what has been happening in Yemen. We see what has been happening in the Congo, Tibet, Iraq, Syria, Central Africa, and so forth. So these are examples where, despite the important declarations, people have continued to suffer in big, big numbers without any action from the United Nations. Now, to fill this void left by the UN, we have a few NGOs that have formed to try and see if they can do something about this. So we have bodies like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and different countries have got their different human rights organizations that try to do some of the work that ideally should be done by the UN, but it's not happening. We also mentioned the national and regional bodies. They also try to do some of that work. IVE has discussed the issue of the role that can be played by these bodies, the NGOs in particular. And he feels that it is important that given what we have identified as a discursive approach to human rights, that it is important that there is a local understanding. Otherwise, if there is only a global understanding, there is the risk of overlooking local issues. So it's good to have local-based human rights that can focus on the specific local issues and the specific human rights problems that are there in different local areas. So national bodies then are important in order to address the cultural relativism issues. Otherwise, it might, human rights issues can have a global view that might obscure the local problems. But it is good to also think what might be a shortcoming there. There could be risks with cultural relativism hindering realization of human rights. If you think about how people might say, for instance, it's our culture to beat women. It's our culture to circumcise women. It's our culture to bar women from being in the public. That cultural relativism can come with a risk. So it's important to see how we can balance that issue of respecting the culture and cultural sensitivities without using culture as a pretext to exploit and oppress different groups. The other importance of a local approach is that even global issues might need to be addressed at the local level. Say, for instance, an issue like climate change. It affects everyone in the world, but the action that need to be taken can be done at the local level. Things like reforestation, installation of solar power panels, and so forth. Something like terrorism is a global issue, but still we need to do things at the local level, improving the legal framework, security framework, and so forth. Things with the trafficking, again, human trafficking is a global issue, but local laws need to be strengthened to protect the people who are at risk of being trafficked. So and so and so forth. You can think of various issues with a global implication and some examples of how you can take action at the local level. So the issue of Western bias in human rights is a persistent problem. And I read this quote that says that when differing cultural values are discussed, even the agenda of issues has a stereotypically Western bias. How can one seriously claim to be a universalist if one is ethnocentrically unaware of the ideas and values of other belief systems and traditions? So really what is being argued here is that if you're going to remain ignorant on issues facing other people, whether it's culture or otherwise, if you're ignorant, then you are inevitably going to have a Western bias. You're going to assume that what is right for you in the Western context is what is right for everyone else, irrespective of their context. So then the argument is that as human rights discourse is professionalized or hijacked by powerful groups, it risks losing touch with the suffering and needs of the poor and the oppressed, who are the main, or should be, the main authors of human rights. So how do we play our role as social workers? One of the roles that we can play is developing an awareness of the issue of power and power differentials. Where is power located? Where are the privileges located? Where is oppression located? And different people, theorists, have had different perspectives and different approaches. A Marxist approach, for instance, locates power in social classes or in social class analysis, where the powerful classes, the owners of industry, are seen to oppress the working classes. A feminist approach takes a slightly different approach and argues that gender is the main issue, that men historically have oppressed women. Foucault takes a different approach and sees that power is actually not restricted to different classes or different gender, but it lies in the sort of social networks that people create. He says power relations are rooted in the system of social networks. Now, black feminists have taken a different approach, where they have said that it's not that simple that you can say, oh, it's social classes, it's gender that is the problem, but rather it's how those oppressions sort of intersect with each other. So with that intersectional analysis, it locates disadvantage in the multiplication of oppression and identifies the key areas as class, gender, race, and sexuality, and emphasize that it is not enough to look at them separately, but it's the way they interact that's what ends up with a better analysis of oppression. So what can we do then with that sort of knowledge? When we have that knowledge, it helps us to have a holistic approach and recognize the different worldviews that people might have. Also develop an awareness of how people can be excluded, can be disadvantaged, and the discourses that are there to either support or undermine that oppression. The feminists have emphasized the fact that the personal is political. By saying that the personal is political is to say that even what might look like personal issues, they have political implications. So, for instance, the oppression of women in the domestic sphere should be seen as a political issue and not just be dismissed as a minor domestic issue or just an issue affecting one particular woman, because it's usually much broader than that. It's usually a culture that supports that, legal system that don't do anything about it. So it's really not just a personal issue, it's much broader issue, it's a political issue. So in terms of politics, I have argued in one of the papers, which I will try to make available, that you can't escape politics when you are talking about human rights. And IFE also identifies that the ideal form of politics that is consistent with human rights is participatory democracy. And it would be good for you to pause at this point and discuss what participatory democracy is, and whether you agree or disagree that it's the one that is consistent with the concept of human rights. The Australian Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics can be seen as our instrumentality in terms of understanding and upholding human rights. And in section 1.2, in part, states that or commits us to subscribing to the principles and aspirations of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, other international conventions derived from the Declaration, as well as other human rights documents. So while it does not try to define human rights in its own way, in its own social work way, it endorses what is contained in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the other instrumentalities arising from it, like International Convention, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and so on and so forth. All these are all the documents that relate to human rights generally arise from the Universal Declaration. It is the foundation or the cornerstone for all the other covenants and declarations relating to human rights. You can see some of the references we have used for this, and I welcome any discussions, any points of view, differences, agreements on what we have discussed. Thank you very much.